My name is Margaret. I'm 58 years old, and after we paid over $45,000 for our only daughter's wedding, she looked me in the eye at the entrance and said, "You're not invited. Please leave." She thought she was ending my day, but what she really did was end her inheritance. Hello, everyone. I see a few of you are already joining in. It's a quiet afternoon here in Ohio. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I've got a story to tell you, and I have a feeling some of you might understand it all too well. The air on that October afternoon had the kind of crisp, golden quality that photographers pray for. It smelled of autumn leaves and expensive perfume, the scents mingling under the canopy of ancient trees that gave the Grand Oak Manor its name. My husband, Robert, looked more handsome than I'd seen him in years, distinguished in his charcoal suit, the one he saved for occasions that truly mattered. I had spent an hour wrestling my hair into a respectable updo, and the corsage of cream-colored roses and baby's breath pinned my dress felt like a badge of honor. I was the mother of the bride. This was the day I had pictured in my mind's eye, in 1,000 different ways, since the moment I first held my daughter, Olivia, in my arms. "You look beautiful, Maggie," Robert murmured, squeezing my hand as we stood for a moment at the edge of the manicured lawn, taking it all in. The string quartet was already playing, a soft classical melody that drifted on the breeze. Guests in their finest attire were mingling on the stone terrace, their laughter like wind chimes. It was perfect. It was everything we had worked for. In my hands, I clutched a small, heavy box wrapped in shimmering silver paper, tied with a white satin ribbon. Inside was the necklace. It wasn't ostentatious, not a showy piece of modern jewelry. It was a delicate, intricate chain of interlocking gold links, a piece that my grandmother had worn when she married my grandfather after he returned from the war. I had worn it when I married Robert, feeling its cool weight against my skin as a connection to the strong women who came before me. It was more than just an asset, more than just gold. It was a thread connecting the generations of women in our family, a silent promise of continuity, resilience, and love. I couldn't wait to see Olivia's face when she opened it, to fasten it around her neck myself, completing the circle. We walked up the pristine cobblestone path, our steps sure and proud, and then I saw her. Olivia! She was standing near the grand entrance, a vision in ivory lace, her hair swept up in a style that must have cost a fortune. She was breathtaking, a perfect porcelain doll. But as she turned toward us, her face was a mask of cold composure. There was none of the bridal radiance I expected, none of the nervous excitement. Her expression was as blank and polished as a marble statue. She walked straight toward us, her steps deliberate, her expensive gown rustling with a sound that seemed, to my ears, almost angry. Her fiancé, David, a young man whose smile had always seemed a size too large for his face, trailed a few steps behind her. He wouldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on some distant point over my shoulder. "Mom, Dad," Olivia said. Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth, like a newsreader announcing traffic delays. "Sweetheart, you look absolutely beautiful," I started, my own voice thick with emotion. I lifted the gift. "I have something for you, from Grandma Rose." She held up a hand, a gesture so sharp and dismissive, it physically stopped me mid-sentence. "You're not invited." The words hung in the perfect autumn air, so alien and wrong that for a moment my brain refused to process them. It was like hearing a sentence in a language I didn't speak. I thought I must have misheard. I managed a weak, confused laugh. "What, honey? Don't be silly. We wouldn't miss this for the world." "I'm not being silly," she said, her voice a little louder now, a little sharper, slicing through my disbelief. "I said you shouldn't be here. I need you to leave." Robert, who had been beaming with pride, let his smile evaporate. He took a half step forward, placing himself slightly in front of me, a protective instinct as old as time. "Olivia, what on earth is going on? Stop this nonsense." "It's not nonsense," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. It was something far worse. She was detached, as if she was speaking to hotel staff who had brought the wrong room service order. "You're not invited," she said. "Please leave. Don't make this difficult." My gaze flickered past her. I saw David's mother, Eleanor, a woman who dripped condescension as easily as she dripped diamonds. Watching us from the terrace, a faint, triumphant smile played on her lips before she turned away, lifting her champagne flute to a friend as if she were toasting a private victory. The string quartet seemed to falter for a moment, a single sour note hanging in the air. A few guests had turned their heads, their expressions a mixture of morbid curiosity and mild irritation at the scene we were creating. My throat grew dry. The silver box in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds, a deadweight of love rejected. I looked at my daughter, my only child, the little girl whose scraped knees I had kissed better, the teenager whose dramatic heartbreaks I had soothed with ice cream and patience, the young woman whose college fund we had built by putting off our own dreams, by driving the same car for 15 years, by skipping vacations and promotions so she could have the best. I searched her face for a flicker of doubt, a hint of regret, anything that would tell me my daughter was still in there somewhere. There was nothing, just a blank, calculated emptiness. I was a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied up, before she could get back to her perfect day. "Please leave," she said again, her voice a little softer this time, but with the chilling finality of a closing door. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. A strange, cold calm washed over me, a defense mechanism my body threw up against a pain too vast to comprehend in that moment. I simply nodded once, a small, tight movement of my head. I saw the muscle in Robert's jaw clench, the quiet sign of a rage he was wrestling into submission for my sake. He gently took the silver box from my trembling hands, his warm fingers a stark contrast to the chill that had settled deep into my bones. He put a hand on the small of my back, a steady, grounding pressure. We turned around. We walked away from our daughter's wedding, past the floral arch we had paid for, past the string quartet whose contract Robert had personally negotiated, past the smiling, oblivious guests who didn't know they were witnessing a live amputation. Dignity was the only thing she hadn't taken from us yet, and we held onto it with everything we had. The interior of our 10-year-old sedan had never felt so much like a funeral car. The drive home was silent, but it was a loud, roaring silence, filled with the unspoken words and unshed tears of two people whose world had just been shattered. Robert kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were bone white. I stared out the passenger window, but I wasn't seeing the passing trees or the suburban houses decorated for fall. I was seeing a slideshow of memories, each one now cast in a harsh, unforgiving new light. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But underneath the pain, something else was stirring, pushing its way through the shock. It was clarity, a horrifying, painful, and utterly undeniable clarity. This hadn't happened today. This wasn't a sudden bridal meltdown. This was the harvest of seeds we had allowed to be planted for 2 decades. We had been too blind, too hopeful, too steeped in the unconditional love of parenthood to see the weeds choking out everything else. I remembered the fight over her college fund. We had saved diligently since she was born, a separate account we were so proud of. In her sophomore year, she'd wanted to take a significant chunk of it, not for books or tuition, but for a lavish spring break trip to Cabo with David. When we gently refused, explaining it was for her education, the argument had been volcanic. "You don't trust me," she'd screamed. "It's my money." It wasn't, of course, but even then, the sense of entitlement was there. We'd eventually given in, transferring a smaller amount to keep the peace. We thought it was a one-time concession. It was a precedent. I remembered my own father's funeral 3 years ago. It was a somber, difficult day. During the reception at our house, I'd found Olivia in the kitchen with a cousin, not grieving, but scrolling through photos on her phone. I overheard her whisper, "I can't believe what Aunt Carol is wearing. It's so last season." She had shown more concern for fashion than for her grandfather's passing, a chilling display of shallowness we had dismissed as youthful self-absorption. The memories kept coming, each one a small cut. The time Robert was passed over for a big promotion at his firm. It was a blow to his career, and it meant our budget would be tight for a while. We sat Olivia down to explain. Her first response wasn't, "I'm sorry, Dad," or "How can I help?" It was a panicked, "Does this mean I can't get the new iPhone when it comes out?" The lack of empathy was breathtaking. "It wasn't Olivia," I said, my voice raspy, surprising myself. Robert glanced at me, his expression a mask of grief and confusion. "What do you mean, Margaret? Of course it was her. We saw her, we heard her." "No," I said, the truth feeling like broken glass in my throat. "It was us. It's our fault. We let this happen. We kept writing checks to fix problems. We kept quiet to avoid arguments. We never taught her that love is a two-way street. We taught her that love is an open bank account with no credit limit and no consequences for default." He didn't argue. He just let out the long, shuddering breath and nodded, his eyes returning to the road. The conversation was over, but a decision was forming, unspoken in the heavy air between us. When we got home, the house felt cavernous and cold, an echo chamber for our disappointment. The "Welcome Home" banner a neighbor had hung on our porch as a joke for when we returned from the big day seemed like a cruel mockery. I walked straight past the living room, past the kitchen, and into my small home office. Robert followed a few steps behind me, his presence a silent, solid reassurance. On the shelf was a row of neat, labeled binders for taxes, for home maintenance, for our wills. And there it was, a thick, 3-ring binder, innocently labeled with a plastic strip on the spine, Olivia's wedding. I pulled it down from the shelf and opened it on the desk. For the past year, it had been a source of joy and excitement, a project we poured our love into. Now, it looked like something else entirely. It was an arsenal. It was a book of evidence. Inside were copies of every contract, every invoice, every payment schedule, all meticulously organized with colored tabs. The Grand Oak Manor, the caterer, the florist, the band, the photographer, all in our name, all paid for or scheduled to be paid for from our accounts. I wasn't just a heartbroken mother. I was a meticulous planner, a woman who had managed a household, a budget, and a family for over 30 years. And in her breathtaking arrogance, my daughter had forgotten that. She thought she was cutting me out, but she had left the entire control panel right in front of me. "Robert," I said, my voice steady now, the tremor gone, replaced by a cold resolve. "Look at this." He leaned over my shoulder, his finger tracing a line on the main contract for the venue. He pointed to a clause buried in the fine print. "Final payment, representing 50% of the total fee, is due by 8 p.m. on the day of the event." I looked at the digital clock on the desk. It was 6:37 p.m. A cold, clear purpose settled over me. This wasn't about revenge. I wasn't a vindictive person. This was about consequences. It was about balancing the scales. It was about teaching a lesson we should have taught 20 years ago. Actions have repercussions. We didn't need to have a lengthy discussion. The look that passed between us was of complete, unified understanding. The years of quiet frustration, of being taken for granted, of explaining away behavior that was inexcusable, had all coalesced into this one moment of stark, cold action. There was no shouting, no crying. The grief was still there, a deep, resonant ache in my chest, but it was now jacketed in steel. I picked up the phone on my desk. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I looked at the contract for the Grand Oak Manor, at the account number for Robert's primary credit card, the one with the high limit we used for major expenses and paid off religiously every month. The final payment, the last 50%, a staggering $22,500, was scheduled to be automatically charged in less than 90 minutes. "I'm not calling the venue," I said, looking at Robert. My voice was low but firm. "Abernathy, the manager, he'll just argue.
He'll put Olivia on the phone and she'll cry or scream and it will become a mess. Robert nodded, his face grim. He found the clause in the contract again. It says right here, payment is the responsibility of the undersigned. That's us. So what's the move? I said, the source. We don't stop the person asking for money, we stop the money itself. I flipped the credit card over and dialed the number on the back. After navigating the infuriating but predictable automated menu, a cheerful human voice finally answered. Thank you for calling Citadel Card Services. My name is Brenda. How can I help you today?
Hello, Brenda, I said, my voice even and calm, a stark contrast to the tempest inside me. I gave her Robert's name and account information, passing the security questions with an ease that came from decades of managing our shared finances. I'm calling about a significant pending charge. I need to place an immediate hold on a specific transaction from a specific merchant. Okay, I can certainly help with that, Mrs. Holloway, Brenda said, her tone professional. Do you have the merchant's name? Yes, the merchant is the Grand Oak Manor. I spelled it out for her slowly and clearly. There is a charge of $22,500 scheduled to be processed at 8 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. I need to dispute that charge and put an immediate stop on that payment. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the soft rhythmic clicking of a keyboard. Okay, I see the pre-authorization here in the system. It's a large amount. Can I ask the reason for the dispute, ma'am? Is this a fraudulent charge? This was the critical part. I chose my words with surgical precision. The services that were contracted for were not rendered to the cardholder. The cardholder and his spouse were denied entry to the event we were paying for. Brenda's professional cheerfulness dropped a notch. There was a beat of silence. Excuse me, ma'am? You were denied entry? That is correct, I said, keeping my voice level. We arrived at the venue and were informed by the beneficiary of the event that we were not invited and were explicitly asked to leave the premises. Therefore, we are not paying for an event we were barred from attending. The silence on the other end of the line was thick, with what I imagined was a mixture of shock and bureaucratic procedure. Well, that's certainly a valid reason for a dispute, Brenda said finally, her voice all business now. I have never heard that one before, but it absolutely qualifies. I've placed a temporary block on all charges from that merchant. I'm also flagging the account for potential fraudulent activity, and our investigation team will follow up with you in writing. But for now, I can confirm that no payment will be processed to the Grand Oak Manor from this account. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No, Brenda, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. Thank you, very, very helpful. I hung up the phone and looked at Robert. The first domino had been pushed. It was a clean, legal, and irreversible move. We hadn't broken a contract. We had simply exercised our rights as consumers who had been denied the very service we were purchasing. The beauty of it was in its elegant simplicity. Eleanor could flash her fancy credit cards all she wanted, but she couldn't force our bank to release our funds. The house was quiet. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. A wedding sky. I felt a pang of what might have been, a ghost of the joy I was supposed to be feeling right now. I took a deep breath and pushed it down. The time for grieving would come later. Right now, we were in a storm, and my job was to be the lighthouse. For the next hour, we sat in a strange, tense limbo. We didn't talk. Robert made us some tea, which we held in our hands more for warmth than for thirst. We sat at the kitchen table, the wedding binder open between us like a book of scripture. I half expected the phone to ring, for Olivia's name to flash across the screen in a blaze of angry entitlement. But there was nothing. The silence felt ominous, the calm before the inevitable deluge. I pictured the scene at the manor. It would be around 8 p.m. now. The main course would have been served, the toasts would be starting, and somewhere in a back office, Mr. Abernathy, the manager, would be running the final payment. He would see the declined message. The scene played out in my mind so vividly. The initial confusion, the polite but firm knock on the door of the bridal suite, Mr. Abernathy, his face a mask of professional concern, explaining the situation to Olivia and David.
The flash of panic in Olivia's eyes, the immediate instinctive turn to David, who in turn would look helplessly toward his mother, Eleanor. And Eleanor, I knew, would relish this moment. It was her chance to be the hero, to demonstrate her superior wealth and power, and to put us, the humble middle-class parents, firmly in our place. At 8:17 p.m., my email pinged. The sound was unnaturally loud in the kitchen. I walked over to my laptop and opened it. The email was exactly what I had predicted. Subject: urgent, payment for Holloway and Thompson wedding. Dear Mrs. Holloway, this email is to inform you that the final payment for today's event, charged to the credit card on file, was declined. As per our conversation earlier this week where you confirmed all was in order, this was quite unexpected. However, please be advised that the outstanding balance of $22,500 has now been settled in full by Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, mother of the groom. She has graciously handled the matter to ensure the evening could proceed without disruption. Sincerely, Charles Abernathy, General Manager of the Grand Oak Manor. I read the email twice, then a third time, savoring the words, graciously handled the matter. I almost laughed. Robert leaned over to read it with me. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. She took the bait, I whispered. He looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. What do you mean? She paid it. She saved the day for them? Oh, she thinks she did, I said, tapping the screen. She thinks she just won. She just swooped in with her American Express black card or whatever it is and erased us, proving that she's the one in control now. She just made herself financially responsible for the entire event. He saw it then. The genius of my first move wasn't just in stopping our payment, it was in creating a vacuum of responsibility that my opponent, in her supreme arrogance, had rushed in to fill. Eleanor hadn't saved the day, she had just bought a front-row ticket to a disaster of her own making. She had willingly, eagerly stepped into the trap. She wants to play, I said to Robert, my voice firm. Fine, let's play. The game had changed. This was no longer just about our hurt feelings. It was a power play between two families, two mothers, two different worlds. And Eleanor had just shown her hand. She thought her wealth was her greatest weapon. She had no idea that my meticulous record-keeping and middle-class practicality were about to be far more devastating. I turned a page in the binder. Next up, the florist, the band, the photographer, the cake. My fight wasn't over. It had just been given a new, sharper focus. With Eleanor's email confirming she had assumed financial responsibility, the entire dynamic shifted. In the world of contracts and vendors, she was no longer just a guest, she was the new client. And I was simply the original client whose contract had now, for all intents and purposes, been superseded by a new paying party. It gave me incredible, unforeseen leverage.
I looked at the next tab in my binder, the one labeled Florals. The company was Bloom and Petal Florists. We had paid them in full 2 weeks ago, a sum of just over $5,000 for everything from the table centerpieces to the bouquets to the massive, breathtaking archway under which the ceremony had taken place. I found the contract and highlighted a sentence with my finger. All floral arrangements, vases, and associated decor remain the property of the client who has paid for the service until the conclusion of the event. I dialed the number. A frazzled-sounding woman answered on the second ring. Bloom and Petal, this is Cynthia. Hello, Cynthia. This is Margaret Holloway. You provided the flowers for the Holloway-Thompson wedding today at the Grand Oak Manor. Oh, yes, Mrs. Holloway. A pleasure to hear from you. Everything looked beautiful, didn't it? It did, Cynthia, I said calmly. However, there has been a significant change of plans. The financial responsibility for the event has been assumed by a new party, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. As my contract with you has been paid in full and I am no longer a guest at the event, I need you to dispatch a team immediately to retrieve my property. There was a stunned silence. Retrieve the flowers? Ma'am, the reception is still going on. There are over 100 guests. I am aware, I said, but those flowers belong to me, not to the current host of the event.
My contract was for the floral arrangements for my daughter's wedding, which I was to attend. As I have been uninvited, I am exercising my right to reclaim my property. Please have your team collect all the centerpiecings, the arrangements on the head table, the decorations from the cake table, and the floral installations from the main archway by 9:30 p.m. Otherwise, I will have to consider them stolen property left at an unsecured location, and I cannot be responsible for them. I could hear her frantic breathing, the rustle of papers. I don't know if we can do that. It's highly unusual. Cynthia, I said, my voice dropping to a firm, non-negotiable tone that I hadn't used since Olivia was a teenager trying to break curfew. My name is on the contract. My money paid for those flowers. The new host, Mrs. Thompson, has no claim to them. If you leave my property there under the purview of a non-contracted party, you are in breach of our agreement. 9:30 p.m. I hung up before she could argue further. Next, the band. Rhythm and Soul Collective. A fantastic 6-piece group. We had paid a 50% deposit. The final 50% was due in cash at the end of the night. I called the band leader, a man named Marcus, whose cell number was on the contract. He answered over the din of the party. Hello? Marcus, it's Margaret Holloway. Hey, Mrs. H, we're killing it. Your daughter's a great dancer. I'm glad to hear that, Marcus. I'm calling to inform you of a change. Our agreement was for a 4-hour set from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Unfortunately, as the original clients, we are no longer present. The new benefactor for the evening is Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. You are, of course, welcome to attempt to secure the final cash payment from her for the remainder of the evening. However, our contractual obligation ends now. We paid for the first 2 hours. It is now 9:15. Your contract with us is fulfilled. Whoa, hold on, Mrs. H. You're just pulling the plug? I'm not pulling the plug, Marcus. I'm informing you that my part of the deal is done. You've been paid for your time so far. Any further performance needs to be negotiated with the new person in charge. I'd advise you to get that cash from Mrs. Thompson before you play another note. Good luck. Then, the wedding cake. A 4-tiered masterpiece from a boutique bakery called Sweet Indulgence. We'd paid a deposit, but the final, substantial payment was due upon delivery. I had personally handed the baker a check that morning when she arrived. I called her mobile number. Hi, Marie. It's Margaret Holloway. I'm calling about the check I gave you this morning for Olivia's wedding cake. Oh, hi, Margaret. Is everything okay? Did everyone love the cake? I'm sure they will, Marie. However, I need to ask you to do something for me. I need you to place a stop payment on that check immediately. I'm afraid I have to retract my payment. What? Why? The cake has been delivered and set up. I understand, but the circumstances of the event have changed. I am no longer the host. I was asked to leave. I cannot pay for a cake for a party I am not attending. You will need to secure payment from the new host, Eleanor Thompson. I suggest you send someone to the venue with a credit card machine immediately, before they cut into it. If they serve that cake without paying you, it's theft. Finally, the photographer. This one was the easiest and, in some ways, the most satisfying. Her contract was for 8 hours of coverage, paid in full. The contract also stated, in a clause I had specifically asked her to add, that the digital files and all rights to the photos belonged exclusively to the client named on the agreement, Margaret Holloway. I sent her a simple, polite email. Subject: Re. Holloway Thompson Wedding Photography. Hi, Susan. Hope you're getting some beautiful shots. This email is to confirm, as per our contract, that all photos from the event are the exclusive property of the undersigned. Please do not share, post, or deliver any images, proofs, or digital files to Olivia Thompson, David Thompson, or Eleanor Thompson. They do not have the rights to them. I am the sole owner of the images and will be in touch next week regarding delivery to my address. I closed the laptop. Robert just looked at me, a mixture of awe and shock on his face. Maggie, he said, shaking his head slowly, you've thought of everything. I didn't do anything they didn't deserve, I said quietly. She wanted a perfect day. But she forgot that perfection is in the details. And I was the one who handled the details. And then we waited. We imagined the scene. The lights are low, the guests are dancing. Suddenly, a team of florists in uniforms starts methodically stripping the tables of their beautiful centerpieces, leaving bare white cloths. The band finishes a rousing rendition of Uptown Funk, says, "Thank you and good night," and starts packing up their instruments 2 hours early. The bride goes to the photographer to ask for a specific shot with her college friends, only to be told, "I'm sorry, my client has instructed me to finish for the evening." The caterer approaches the head table just as they're about to cut the cake, holding a portable credit card machine and looking at Eleanor expectantly. Olivia's perfect day, the one that she had kicked us out of, was being dismantled piece by piece, not with a bomb, but with a series of quiet, legally sound phone calls. Her fantasy was collapsing under the weight of its own cruel foundation. The first phone call from Olivia came at 10:17 p.m. Her name flashed on my screen, a beacon of fury. I looked at it, took a breath, and pressed the ignore button. Then another call came immediately after. Ignored. And a third. Ignored. A flurry of texts followed, each more frantic and furious than the last. They were a digital temper tantrum.
What is wrong with you? Are you insane? You are ruining my wedding. Everyone is leaving. The flowers are gone. The band left. How could you do this to me? This is the cruelest, most selfish thing anyone has ever done. I hate you. You will regret this. There was no apology. There was no question about why we might have done this. There was no glimmer of self-awareness, just pure, undiluted rage that her party had been disrupted. She wasn't sorry for hurting us. She was furious that we had refused to stay hurt quietly. I read the messages, felt a brief, sharp sting of the old maternal guilt, and then deleted the entire thread. It was poison, and I was done drinking it. The real battle, however, didn't begin with a text message. It began a week later, with a thick cream-colored envelope that arrived by certified mail, requiring a signature. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy with menace. It was from a high-powered law firm in the city, a name I recognized from billboards. Franklin, Adler, and Thorne. Inside was a letter, written on heavy stationery that probably cost more than our weekly grocery bill. It was a formal letter of demand. It was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It accused us of intentional infliction of emotional distress, tortious interference with a contract, and breach of verbal contract. It claimed we had made extensive financial promises to our daughter and her new husband regarding their wedding and future, and that our abrupt and malicious actions had caused them significant financial and reputational damage. It stated that Eleanor Thompson had graciously and selflessly stepped in to mitigate the damage we had caused, and it formally demanded that we reimburse Eleanor for the $22,500 she had paid to the venue. Furthermore, it demanded a public apology and a settlement of $50,000 to be paid to Olivia and David for their pain and suffering, to avoid a lawsuit that would, the letter hinted, be personally and financially devastating for us. They thought we were a pair of aging, heartbroken, middle-class parents who would be terrified by a letter from a fancy lawyer. They thought we would crumble under the threat of legal fees and public humiliation. Robert read the letter over my shoulder. His face, which had been slowly regaining its color over the past week, went pale with anger. "They're bluffing," he said, his voice tight. "This is intimidation. They can't possibly think this will hold up." "I know," I said, folding the letter neatly and placing it back in the envelope. But it wasn't just intimidation. It was a declaration of war. They had lawyers. They had money. They had an army of flying monkeys in the family, like Robert's own sister, my sister-in-law Carol, who had been posting syrupy comments on Olivia's social media about rising above family drama and true love conquering all. "Well," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I guess we need a lawyer too." We didn't go to the local guy who did our wills and real estate closings. We needed someone different.
We needed a specialist. I spent an entire day online cross-referencing databases, reading reviews, looking for a litigator, someone sharp, someone who understood that high-stakes family disputes were rarely about the law and always about power. I found him in the city, a man named Daniel Chen. His reviews described him as a shark in a nice suit and the calmest man in any room. He sounded perfect. We sat in Mr. Chen's sleek, minimalist office. 2 days later, it was on the 40th floor with a view that stretched for miles. He was a trim man in his late 40s with intelligent, patient eyes that seemed to miss nothing. We laid out the whole story from the beginning, trying to keep the emotion out of it and stick to the facts. I handed him the wedding binder, the letter from Franklin Adler and Thorne, and one other thing. "This came yesterday," I said, pushing a small USB drive across the polished glass desk. "It's from the wedding planner, a woman named Jessica. She was very upset. Apparently, Eleanor was incredibly rude to her, and Olivia tried to short her on the final bill after the chaos started. She said she's had enough with entitled clients. She sent me her entire email correspondence with Olivia and David from the past 6 months. Mr. Chen, without a word, plugged the drive into his laptop. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the office was the soft clicking of his mouse. We watched his expression change from professional interest to focused intensity. He scrolled through emails where Olivia referred to us as her personal ATMs. He read a thread where David and Olivia discussed how to manage us and get the wedding paid for without them getting in the way of the aesthetic. He saw the email where David assured Olivia, "Just get the money for the venue from them. Once we're married, my mother will take care of us. You won't have to deal with your parents' drama anymore." Finally, he looked up, a grim, determined look on his face. He took off his glasses and polished them slowly with a cloth from his pocket. "Mr. and Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice calm and measured. "This isn't a case of emotional distress. This is a clear, documented case of attempted financial exploitation with intent. They don't have a leg to stand on." In fact, he leaned forward, and for the first time I saw the glint of the shark his reviews had mentioned. "I believe we have grounds for a very strong counterclaim. They started a war, but I don't think they have any idea how to fight it." For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground solidify beneath my feet. We weren't on the defensive anymore. The storm had passed and it was time to rebuild. But we wouldn't be rebuilding the same house. We were going to build a fortress. Mr. Chen's first move was a masterpiece of strategic restraint. He didn't fire back with threats or accusations. He sent a crisp 2-sentence response to the powerhouse law firm. It stated simply that their claims were baseless and that any further communication should be directed to his office. The letter was the legal equivalent of a calm, raised eyebrow. It was a splash of cold water on their bonfire of arrogance. The aggressive phone calls from their junior associates stopped. The veiled threats of an imminent reputation-destroying lawsuit ceased. Instead, a week later, a new letter arrived. The tone was markedly different, softer, more reasonable. It was like they'd swapped a bulldog for a golden retriever. Eleanor's lawyers were now proposing a formal mediation to be held at their offices. They framed it as a chance for both parties to air their grievances and find a path forward for the sake of the family. It was an olive branch, but I knew it was poisoned. "It's a trap," Robert said immediately, tossing the letter onto the kitchen table. "They want to get us in a room and work us over emotionally." "Of course it is," Mr. Chen confirmed when I called him. His voice was laced with something that sounded like amusement. "They know a lawsuit is a loser for them, especially with those emails. Discovery would be a nightmare. They'd be exposed. So now they want to get you in a room, outnumber you, and use emotional pressure and manipulation to get what they want. They'll have Olivia cry. They'll have Eleanor talk about the sanctity of family and the importance of forgiveness. They'll try to make you feel guilty and wear you down until you agree to pay something just to make it go away." "So we shouldn't go?" I asked, my heart sinking a little. I wanted this to be over.
"Oh, you should absolutely go," Mr. Chen said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "They've just handed us the perfect stage for our final act. They're expecting 2 heartbroken parents. They're not expecting a prepared and unified front. We won't be going alone. The day of the mediation, I felt a strange sense of calm. The nervous flutter in my stomach was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I chose my outfit with the care of a general preparing for a state dinner. A simple, well-tailored navy blue dress. No frills, no apologies. It was the armor of a woman who knew her own worth. Robert stood beside me, a quiet pillar of strength in his best suit. We walked into the Franklin Adler and Thorne conference room, not as victims being led to the slaughter, but as equals, walking onto a battlefield of our choosing. The room was intimidating by design. A long, polished mahogany table that seemed to stretch for a mile, surrounded by plush leather chairs that swallowed you whole. One entire wall was glass, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline, a subtle reminder of the power and money that resided there. On one side of the table sat the opposing force, Olivia, David, and Eleanor. They were a tableau of calculated sorrow. Olivia looked pale and fragile, dabbing at her eyes with the tissue. David sat beside her, his hand on her back in a gesture of protective comfort. Eleanor was the picture of stern, matriarchal concern. They had their lead lawyer with them, the silver-haired Mr. Adler, who looked at us with an expression of paternal disappointment. They looked up as we entered, their expressions a carefully rehearsed blend of pity and condescension. They expected us to be alone, to be flustered, to be ready to capitulate. They were not prepared for what happened next. I walked in, followed by Robert. Then came Mr. Chen, carrying a sleek leather briefcase that clicked shut with an authoritative snap. And right behind him was a sharp-looking woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and a warm but nonsense demeanor. She carried a binder that looked even more organized than mine. Mr. Adler stood, a confused look briefly crossing his face. "Mr. Chen," he said, gesturing to the woman, "I wasn't aware a fourth party would be joining us." Mr. Chen smiled, a thin, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Adler, my apologies. Allow me to introduce my colleague, Ms. Rebecca Davis. She is Mr. and Mrs. Holloway's longtime financial advisor and the acting trustee for their estate." The composure on the other side of the table fractured like cheap glass. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hand slipping from Olivia's back. Olivia just stared, her mouth slightly agape, the tissue forgotten in her hand. This wasn't the ambush they had planned. We had brought our own army. Mr. Adler, the silver-haired lawyer, recovered first, his professional mask slipping back into place. He cleared his throat and began his opening remarks, his voice as smooth and practiced as a river stone. He spoke of family, of unfortunate misunderstandings, of the deep pain our admittedly drastic actions had caused this lovely young couple on which should have been the happiest day of their lives. He painted a picture of Olivia as a heartbroken daughter, overwhelmed by stress, who had made a mistake in a moment of pressure. He portrayed Eleanor as a benevolent matriarch who had only tried to help, to salvage a situation that was spiraling out of control. He concluded by reiterating their generous offer, framing it now as a path to healing. If we reimbursed Eleanor the $22,500 and wrote a formal letter of apology to Olivia and David for the public humiliation, they would consider the matter closed and begin the difficult process of rebuilding the family. When he finished, the room was silent. Everyone looked at us, expecting a response, an apology, perhaps tears. Mr. Chen didn't say a word. He simply opened his briefcase, took out a tablet, and with a few quiet taps, connected it to the large flat-screen monitor on the conference room wall. "Before we discuss any offers or the process of rebuilding," he said, his voice cutting through the stuffy, self-important air of the room, "I believe a little context is in order. The truth, I find, is always a good place to start." The screen lit up. It was an email from Olivia to David. The subject line read, "The Parent Problem."
Ugh, David, Mom is driving me absolutely crazy about the centerpieces. Her taste is so dated, it's embarrassing. Can we just tell her we've handled it? I just need to make sure her final check for the venue clears before the wedding, then we can do whatever we want. We just need to manage her for a few more weeks. She's our personal ATM after all. Lol. A sharp intake of breath came from Olivia's side of the table. She gasped, her face going white, then a blotchy, furious red. That's out of context, she stammered. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the screen, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Seeing the words there, in black and white, was somehow more painful than the dismissal at the wedding itself. Mr. Chen, unperturbed, clicked to the next email. This one was from David to Olivia. Don't worry, babe. Just get the money for the venue from them. That's the last big one. Once we're married, my mother will take care of us. You won't have to deal with your parents' drama anymore. Just play nice for a few more weeks. Almost at the finish line. Is this what you would call a mistake in a moment of pressure, Mr. Adler? Mr. Chen asked quietly, turning to face the other lawyer. Or does it look more like a premeditated, coordinated effort to secure funds under false pretenses? In some circles, they call that fraud. Mr. Adler was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Eleanor stared at her son, her mouth a thin, hard, unforgiving line. The lovely young couple suddenly looked a lot less lovely. But we weren't done. Ms. Davis, our financial advisor, spoke next. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried the undeniable weight of authority. In light of these communications and a long-term pattern of significant one-sided financial requests, I was retained by Mr. and Mrs. Holloway several weeks ago to conduct a full review of their estate and financial structures. I'd like to inform all parties present of the actions that have been taken. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. As of 2 weeks ago, all joint accounts with Ms. Olivia Thompson have been closed. All informal lines of credit have been terminated. A formal block has been placed on any attempts to access funds through claims of emergency. And any and all status as a beneficiary on trusts, retirement accounts, or life insurance policies has been irrevocably revoked and redistributed. If the emails were a body blow, this was a knockout punch. Olivia made a small choking sound. David looked like he was going to be physically ill. He wasn't just losing a one-time settlement. He was watching a future of unearned wealth, of easy living, of country clubs and European vacations evaporate before his very eyes. The foundation of his entire relationship with my daughter was revealed for what it was, a business transaction that had just gone bankrupt.
The air in the room was thick with shattered illusions and the stench of greed exposed. Mr. Adler, for all his silver-haired bluster, was clearly floundering. He looked at his clients, who were either staring in stony silence or actively avoiding eye contact with each other, the first cracks in their deceitful alliance beginning to show. He tried one last desperate gambit, turning his attention back to me, his voice attempting a tone of sorrowful reason. This is vindictive, Margaret," he said, using my first name as if we were old friends. "I understand you're hurt, but to cut your own daughter off from her family inheritance, her future, it's a cruel and unusual punishment. A parent's love should be unconditional." That was when I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the long, polished table, clear and steady and utterly devoid of doubt. "You're mistaken, Mr. Adler," I said. "You talk about her future. Let's talk about my legacy." I reached into my own briefcase and pulled out a final, thick document. It was professionally bound with a simple, elegant title on the cover. I slid it across the table, and it came to a stop directly in front of Olivia. "My daughter was right about one thing," I continued, looking directly at Olivia for the first time since we had entered the room. Her eyes were wide, filled with a confusing mixture of hate and desperation. She said it was her day. She was absolutely correct. And she made her choices for that day. She chose a party over her parents. She chose her new family's money over our love. Now, Robert and I are making our choices for our future and for the legacy we want to leave behind. I gestured to the document. You see, we recently sold the family lake house, the one Olivia always assumed would be part of her inheritance, the one she was already making plans to renovate. We've taken that money, along with a significant portion of our estate, and established this. Mr. Chen spoke, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. This is the charter for the Holloway Legacy Foundation. It's a fully funded, legally incorporated charitable trust. Its mission, he paused, making eye contact with every single person on the other side of the table, is to provide financial and legal support to elderly parents who are victims of financial exploitation, neglect, or abandonment by their own children. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound you could feel the weight of it pressing down, sucking the air out of the room. It was the sound of a checkmate. I stood up. Robert stood with me, his hand resting on my shoulder. "You wanted my money, Olivia, but you didn't want my presence," I said, my voice free of anger, free of malice, holding only the simple, unvarnished truth. So I have decided to give both my money and my presents to people who will value them. The foundation is our new beneficiary. It is our legacy. It is our answer. I turned my gaze to Eleanor, whose face was a mask of cold fury. Her perfect plan had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly. "And Mrs. Thompson," I added, a hint of steel in my voice, "you were so eager to pay for the wedding. Please, consider it your gift to the happy couple. I believe your lawyer has our mailing address for any future pointless correspondence." We turned and walked out of the room. Mr. Chen and Miss Davis followed, closing the door softly behind them. We didn't look back. We left them there, sitting in the ruins of their own greed, silenced by the truth they could no longer deny. The war was over. We had won. Not by being louder or richer, but by being smarter, more prepared, and by finally understanding that the ultimate power isn't the power to div, it's the power to say no.
The fallout with the extended family was messy, as we knew it would be. Robert's sister, Carol, called one evening, her voice dripping with sanctimonious concern. "I just don't understand how you can be so cold, Robert," she'd said. "She's your only child. A family should forgive. You need to be the bigger person." Robert, who for years would have mumbled an apology and tried to smooth things over, was a changed man. "Carol," he said, his voice quiet but firm as iron, "we were the bigger people for 27 years. We paid in time, in money, and in self-respect. Our account is now closed. This is our decision. You don't have to understand it, but you do have to respect it. If you can't, then we don't have anything more to talk about right now." He hung up, and I knew we had crossed another threshold together. One afternoon, I received a call from an old friend from college, someone I hadn't spoken to in ages. She'd heard a garbled version of the story through the grapevine. "Maggie, is it true?" she asked. I told her the whole story. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "My God," she said. "My son, he went through a terrible divorce a few years ago. His ex-wife was trying to get full custody of their kids, making up all sorts of lies. It almost broke him. It's a different kind of pain, but it's the same weapon, using family as a way to hurt someone. Your foundation? What a wonderful idea." We talked for an hour, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this strange new territory. About 3 months after the mediation, a single, plain white envelope arrived in the mail. It was addressed to me in Olivia's familiar, loopy handwriting. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. It was the first direct communication we'd had. The letter wasn't filled with excuses or blame or demands. It was short, hesitant, and awkward. She wrote that David had moved out. His mother, Eleanor, after discovering the full depth of their deception, had cut them both off completely. The unlimited funding David had promised Olivia was a fantasy. Olivia was working 2 jobs, one as a waitress, to pay off the debts from the wedding and her own mounting legal fees. She wrote that for the first time in her life, she was truly on her own, and she was terrified. The last line, smudged as if by a tear, read, "I know I destroyed everything. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I read the letter and I felt not anger, not satisfaction, but a deep, quiet sadness for the daughter who had to lose everything to learn the simplest of lessons. It was the apology I had once thought I needed to hear, but I discovered that in healing myself, I no longer needed it to be whole. I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box on my dresser, the box where I kept old photographs and important keepsakes. Robert came in and saw the letter in my hand. He read my expression. "What will you do?" he asked gently. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but not today. Today I have my pottery class, and I'm finally getting the hang of making a proper vase. I chose my own peace. I chose my own joy. Forgiveness might come one day, a quiet visitor knocking at the door. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that it would be on my terms, in my own time. The power to decide was mine now, and I would not give it away again. My story ends there for now. It ends with me, Margaret, a 58-year-old woman walking into a sunlit studio, smiling at the new friends I've made, and sitting down at my potter's wheel. It ends with me taking a deep breath, feeling the cool, damp clay beneath my fingers, and beginning to shape my own beautiful, imperfect life. If you have ever felt taken for granted, if you have ever given a piece of yourself away to keep the peace, if you have ever been made to feel small so that someone else could feel big, know that you are not alone, and know that it is never, ever too late to take back your own hands, your own heart, and your own life. Thank you for listening to my story.